The next step is going to be taping and mudding. Now if you can see here, this has to get taped yet, but I like to start in the corners with my tape. This is self-adhesive tape, so you don't need to put mud underneath this tape. It's a lot easier. You're going to want to make sure that this is pushed into the corner really well. You don't want it to be rounded in the corner. And then another thing, if you can see here where your seams meet and where they meet in the corners, you do not want to overlap your tape. You want it to be just to the edge right here. So our next step is we're going to be taping this entire room, every seam, every corner, all the way around. Here you can see I started mudding. I have a 90-degree corner tool that I'm running down here, and I have an adjustable like a 45-degree that I'm doing here. So it's all taped, and what I'll recommend, your first coat, if you can see these three here, my first coat, this is about a 6-inch trowel. My second coat I'll do an 8 or a 10-inch trowel, and my third coat I'll do about a 12-inch trowel. The reason for that is your first coat is going to be narrow, and as you go it's going to get wider. So you don't want to try to do this all in one coat unless you're a professional. If you're doing this yourself, I've done this enough to be good at it, but I don't do drywall all the time. What I found when I was kind of learning is if you want to put really thin coats of mud on, you'll save yourself so much time sanding. So here we have an adjustable corner tool. You can see here, if you loosen it, it's a little bit rusted.
That's a technical foul.
We're going to loosen it, and you can see here we have different angles. We have probably like a 60-degree angle, like a 30-degree angle up here, and a couple 45-degree angles over here. So what we're going to do is we're going to adjust this. But we want, if you look right here, we don't want this to go tight into the corner. See how there's a little bit of a gap right there? That's where we're going to tighten it. We don't want it to be tight into the corner. We don't want it touching the tape. We want to leave that just a little bit, and then that'll feather out to here. But we want to kind of round this corner to cover all this tape here. This is the corner tool that we're going to use in the corner here. It's slightly less than 90 degrees, and there's a reason for that. And then we have just a 6-inch trowel here. I'm going to start with a smaller trowel, and as I add coats, I'm going to go up in size with my trowel in most cases. So the first thing we're going to do is I use this trowel to get mud right on the corner here, and then we're just going to smooth this in. It's a little less than 90 degrees, and there's a reason for that. It makes it a lot easier to get your mud properly feathered. I'll show you that here in a minute. But we're going to go through and fill the corner up. Don't worry about the little details quite yet. We're just going to fill this entire corner with mud. I find it easier to just put it on there with a smaller trowel. So now we have it all mudded. I'm going to spend a little bit more time and try to get this worked into the corner. Need just a little bit more. And the idea is we're going to cover up all of this tape. I find the corners, usually you can get away with just 2 coats if you do this properly. So now I'm going to get it nice and in the corner. Just go back through a couple of times here. So that's the corner. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take our 6-inch trowel and make sure this is a flexible trowel. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to push it on there like this. If you can see that, I'm going to flex it like this. So what I'll do is I want to flex it this way just a little bit, and I'm going to run down the side just like this. Okay, do the same here. And I don't know if you can see this little bit of a ridge, but that's what we want. That ridge is going to be really easy to sand off. I'll have to do one more coat on this, but we're going to go all the way through and just take that and make that ridge. Now this ridge is going to be really easy to sand off right here. It's really thin. And now we'll go through, the tape's coming off here just a little bit. We're going to go through and do our seam. Now these parts of the drywall here have a little bit of a bevel in them. So if you see here, see right here there's a bevel, and that's designed to cover your tape. So you want to, when you're hanging drywall, keep that in mind because it's going to make your life a lot easier. You want those beveled edges. We're just going to go through quick. We're not worried about details yet. We're just spreading the mud. Then we're going to go back through and scrape all that off, all the excess. The more mud you leave on there, the more you're going to have to sand. Now this is almost finished, and you won't even have to hardly touch this with a sander. This particular one here. You will not have to touch that with a sander, just very, very lightly. And then our next coat will be our finished coat. So now we just want to go through and kind of clean up around our edges. These corners here are a little bit harder. I'd recommend just leave that in there. It's really hard to get out. I can try, but it's hard to get those right into the corner really good. But that's just going to require just a little bit of sanding. We're going to clean that up. We got a little bit to add here. And again, these horizontal seams on the drywall are going to be a lot easier. These seams here are not beveled where you're vertical. Depending on which way you're running the drywall, we ran ours 8 foot horizontally. So these, I went over with a thin coat just to cover the tape, and then my second coat, I'll probably have a 10 or 12 inch trowel. This will end up being almost 20 inches wide to feather this out. I like starting with a smaller trowel on all the seams because you want this to bump up. You want this to be higher than this. That way when you come through with your larger trowel, it's going to feather it to nothing. So that's how I do it. This is just the first coat, so you don't have to be you don't want to put it on really thick, and you don't have to be super detailed with it on your first coat. It's good. You're going to do at least 2 coats. I don't care who you are. You're going to do 2 coats on any room, sometimes 3. Usually our first coat is just going to be a light coat like this. Second coat's going to be a little bit heavier, and then our third coat is not going to be a total coverage coat. It's just going to be more or less touching up some of the rougher spots. We got our first coat on the entire thing. Now it's pretty much hurry up and wait. The first coat usually dries pretty good. Sometimes on these outside walls you'll get some cold spots and maybe some thicker spots where the drywall wasn't perfectly straight. But hopefully this will dry in a matter of maybe 4 or 5 hours. You can see I have it really thin, and you can see here you can still see the tape on some of these corners. That's fine. That's expected. The first coat is really not that important. It's going to be your second coat that's going to be really important. You'll notice all of these I use the 6-inch trowel, and I'll show you tomorrow or when this is dry how we're gonna feather these seams out, and they're gonna. Well, we're back, and you can see here it's pretty dry. There's some spots here in the corners you can see where it's a little bit wet right in the corner, but that's okay because I'm gonna end up going over that anyways. That really doesn't need to be sanded. We just want to get these. The whole goal with this first coat and sanding is just to get rid of these ridges. We just want to get rid of these high ridges because these are going to end up, these mud seams are going to end up being a lot wider. So a lot of this is going to get a lot more mud on it yet. You can see this seam here looks absolutely terrible. But that's okay. That's how I wanted it. That's just how I do it. We're going to get the sanding here. And just get off all these ridges and get our second coat on here. So we're working on our second coat. Like I said before, you can see this is still a little bit wet. That's fine. This was a real thin coat. So I'm going to start in my corners and work my way out. This coat, you're going to want to take a little bit more time and make sure that everything is good, because essentially this is our finished coat. So step one, we're just going to fill that corner with mud. We're not worried about details at the moment. We're just filling it up nice and thick.
Sounds like mini bubble wrap.
Once we have the mud in there, now is when we're going to go through and get our corner just right. We're going to do this a couple of times until we're satisfied with how it looks in the corner. On the outside edge here, we're not worried about that yet. We're only worried about how it looks directly in the corner. And taking a little bit of extra time right now is going to save you tons of time when you are when you're sanding. So now I have the adjustable corner tool. I'm going to start this. I'm not going to do the whole thing here. I'm just going to start it so that I can finish this corner where everything meets. You can see all those little bubbles in there and stuff. You want to work those out because it will dry like that. We will have to go through one more coat, but we won't be coating the whole thing. We're only going to be coating some of the rougher spots. I'm going to go right back through. I'm going to make sure this is nice and clean. And I'm going to try to get right up in this corner. This is always the toughest spot, is right here. Not only is it tough to get the mud just right in there, but it's a lot harder to get a sanding tool in there. So I'm going to try to get that as nice as we can. Okay, and then we're gonna take our trowel, like I showed you before. We're gonna angle it like this because we want to knock this ridge off right here. So if you can see, this is a little bit dramatic, but this is what I'm doing. And I'm gonna start here, and I'm gonna work my way all the way down. And you can see this little ridge that it's leaving. That's what you want. You don't want to get up into the corner. We just want to flatten this out, and then when we come back to sand, all we have to do is sand that ridge flat, and we're good. How you mud is going to save so much time when you're sanding. And sanding is by far the worst part of drywall. We're going to do the same thing here. And you see how that turned out. Turned out pretty good. We got a little bit here we got to do. But this stuff, this little bits right here is going to be really easy to sand. It's not going to be that hard. What you want to try to avoid is sanding gigantic humps that are wide. You know, these little tiny narrow little strips are easy to sand. So then, for this, on these seams, these are the beveled edges, I'm still going to use the 6-inch trowel. Because you don't need to go any wider than that. You're just going to create more work for yourself. So I'm going to go through and just get mud on everything. Again, we're not worried about the details just yet. Okay, now that we have it full, we're going to lightly press and we're going to take the excess mud off. We don't want this to be a ridge because these are beveled. So there's no need for it. And this should be almost no sanding when you're done on these beveled edges. I'm going to go back through one more time. And if you can see that, that is freaking perfect. I mean, you're not going to have to sand that other than just a tiny light little sand. Until you get over here, here we'll have to do a little bit more. So the next thing I want to show you, and this is going to be by far, in my opinion, this is the hardest part, is where your 4-foot ends come together. Because up here, this is beveled, so it's I guess countersunk just a little bit in the drywall, which gives you enough room to put an 1/8-inch layer of mud. This is not. So what we want to do is right here on the seam, we want to build this up just a tiny bit, not too much or you're going to see it through your paint. And then we're going to want to feather it out about 10 inches wide. So you'll have a width here and a width here. But we don't want this to get too tall. Otherwise you're going to see it. And this is going to be the hardest part. I start in the middle. I'm going to put a coat right over the middle of the seam. And just like everything else, we're just putting mud on. We're not worried about the details at the moment. So now I have a little bit of a thick spot right on the seam, you can see. Now I'm going to go down each side with quite a bit of mud. This is a lot of mud, and we're going to remove a lot of this. I know this doesn't look like much at the moment, but just wait. You will see. So you can see how wide we are. Now we're going to want to try to get this finished up. And the goal, I'm going to run one more time down the middle. I'm not pushing very hard. And I don't want to see that tape. If you're seeing the tape, you're pushing too hard. So we're just removing excess mud at this point. We don't want this ridge to be too big, or you're going to see it. So I'm getting the middle nice and smooth. You can see most of those bubbles are gone. There's still a little bit. I'm going to go one more time over it in the middle. Okay, so I would say the middle is done. Now we're going to come to each side. We're going to try to feather all this in real nice. just going to keep going until we're satisfied with how it looks. It's getting really close here. There's a couple little bubbles and stuff like that I'm having to work out. Okay, so there you can see we have it on both sides. There's a little stringer right in the middle. I'm choosing to leave that because that's going to be easy to sand off. So essentially all we have to do when we come back is we have to sand this edge and then we're going to have to sand this middle so that it all meets together. But if you can see the mud, that seam is completely gone now. And that's exactly what we want. Now we're going to have to work this seam right above it. We're going to go back to the 6-inch trowel. And we're just going to spread some mud on there. We're going to want to kind of be careful right here because we're tying in with the seam that we just did. So you're going to want to try to stay away from that. We don't want to mess that up. Well, that took us a few hours to get our second coat on. You can see how much wider we're getting, but still thin. You can see here how thin it is. The thicker you get, the more you're going to have to sand. So we got everything. Most of these horizontal seams are going to be done. The corners are going to be done after the second coat. There'll be some minor touch-ups on some of these not 90-degree corners. And then there'll be some minor touch-up on these vertical seams here. But other than that, it looks pretty good. And this video is going to be a 2-part series. So if you didn't see part 1, I'll put a link on the top at the end of the video for that. This video is going to take place over 3 days. The first day we hung and got our first coat on. Now day 2 we got our second coat on. We're going to let this dry over the weekend and then we'll come back on Monday and sand and do just minor touch-ups. You can see how wide the seam is. It's probably 2 feet wide now. But if you look at it, if you can see real close how smooth that is, there's going to be very, very little sanding that needs to be done here. So we'll be back on Monday. Oh, it's Monday and we're back. Everything's nice and dry. We got to go through, sand this, and then we have some minor touch-ups to do, but you can see this hasn't been sanded yet, but this is pretty much done. There's a few spots. You can see like little crack in there. That's from these little cracks like this seem to form when the mud's put on really thick. This second coat that I put on was really thick, and as it was drying, it cracked. That tiny little hairline crack, you can mud it, but the crack is from when the mud was drying. In my experience, you can paint right over the top of that little crack, and you'll never know it was there, and you're not going to have to deal with it cracking in the future. I probably will, as I'm going around, just put some mud in there, just a tiny little bit. You can see in these corners we got to get some sanding done. But other than that, I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. There's going to be a couple of spots, like some of these 4-foot seams I was talking about. This side is really, really good. But if you go and you look in spots like this, I'm definitely going to have to do some more mudding on this spot here. Once it's sanded, I'm going to have to feather this out quite a bit further. Right where this corner meets and all through here, about right here, about where that light is, this needs to all get redone a little bit. This seam I'll probably make a little bit wider. And there was another one right here I'm gonna have to do some more mudding, but otherwise it turned out pretty good. Well, here you can see we're sanding everything, getting everything sanded down, running into a couple little wet spots, but that's okay. This is 2 days of drying, but on these exterior walls, it's cold outside right now. It's winter here, so on these exterior walls it's a little bit colder and that stuff dries a little bit slower. But you can see these are the spots that you really want to make sure don't end up like this. These all need to get sanded out. This is fine and this is fine, but you see this right here, you're gonna see this kind of stuff through the paint. But this is pretty much done. I'm going through and touching up. You can see the color differences here around the outlet. I had some little spots I had to take care of. This whole seam I had to put a thin coat on again. It just wasn't quite thick enough last time, but that should be pretty much done. A couple little dings here I had to fill in. This seam is completely done. Around these outlets is a little bit trickier, so both of the last outlets I showed you, I had a couple of little rough spots I had to do. But that's all we're doing right now. We're going through and getting these bad spots. We're not putting a complete coat on anymore. We're doing pretty much a finished sand. You can see up in this corner how nice all this looks. This is going to be done. I shouldn't need any touch-ups here. Down here, somebody put their knee into that, so I had to fix that. But otherwise, the seam is done. We're just working our way around. We're definitely taking more time sanding and less time mudding this time, because this is going to be the finished coat on about 90% of it. You can see over here, this I'm not even going to have to touch up this whole seam. This turned out really nice. All the way up. We're just working on getting to the ceilings and everything like that. You can see how, like I was talking about the bevel, you can see how consistent that line is. That's the bevel in the drywall. You really need to use that to your advantage when you're finishing. Well, you can see here we are done with our touch-up coat. There's a couple of spots like this where I had to do thin coats over the whole seam. Otherwise, there's just little tiny spots, little dings and stuff in the corner. We will have to come back and do one light sand and just go through with a fine-tooth comb and make sure everything's done. These corners here are tough. They're all different angles and they're a little bit tough, so these ones ended up taking almost 3 full coats. But we'll have to come back and do a light sand and go through with a fine-tooth comb and make sure everything's perfect. But that's essentially it. You can see here, real light coats, but one more sand and we will be done. So that's it for this video. If you guys like it, hit the thumbs up button, please subscribe, hit the notification bell, and I'll see you on the next one.